Welcome back to the Ottawa Studios inside my canoe head. I am your host, Dr. D. Today, we are going to kick off Season 12, talk about trust in emergency management, Hurricane Helene, and what you can actually specifically do to be ready for something like that. So sit back, grab yourself your favorite beverage. Let's get at her. All right, welcome back. Thanks again for joining us. Season 12. We are nearing episode 300 of this podcast that started on 28 August 2020. All because people were seemingly totally and woefully unprepared to deal with the catastrophic life changes that happen as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. The purpose and intent of this podcast is to provide you free, evidence-based, non-apocalyptic information on how to adopt a prepared life to get ready to deal with calamities as they show themselves and to be ready to rock an incredible life, all while chasing your dreams. And listen, we appreciate your comments. Drop over to our website at www.insidemycanoehead.ca. There's a way to contact us there. There's a way to support the podcast, and everything else you need is on that website. We're available on all platforms, but let's think about it. We all see what Hurricane Helene did to Tennessee, North Carolina, and even the shores of Florida when it hit. We've seen the pictures. We've seen the stories. We've seen the conflicting information. We've seen the challenges that government organizations, not-for-profit organizations, community organizations, and a myriad of independent volunteer and relief organizations that have sprung up. According to the Disaster Research Center at the University of Delaware, there is Type 3 extending and Type 4 emerging groups. Those are groups that either had an organizational structure and are now moving outside of their normal operations into disaster response and relief, which is an extending organization, or you have emerging organizations, which are ones that didn't exist before, but they were created out of need, and they're either addressing disaster-initiated need or the response-initiated need itself. So these organizations emerge out of nowhere, a collection of wonderful humanity getting together to help our neighbors. And we've seen some pretty significant challenges to the reputation of FEMA and other state and local organizations in their response efforts. I want to state up front that I have no special information as to what is going on the ground in and around Asheville, North Carolina, and eastern Tennessee. I'm not here to put truth to some rumor mill, but I am here to talk about trust in emergency management. You are a resident of some town, right? This podcast is downloaded in 1,091 locations in 61 countries around the world. You've chosen to live where you live. You live in an area that has some form of public sector emergency management institution that is organized for the purposes of providing response and relief to those who may face harm as a result of circumstances beyond their control, aka they get walloped by a Category 3 or a Category 4 hurricane and massive mudslides and flooding happens, right? And so we've all seen the pictures. We don't need to rehash everything that's gone. The death toll is going to be incredibly high, but what we do have is a struggle of trust in emergency management. Now, many of my very good friends are emergency managers in the United States. I had the opportunity at the recent Canadian Emergency Preparedness and Climate Adaptation Conference to sit on a keynote panel with Brock Long, the former director of FEMA, and Tim Riker, the contrarian emergency manager, to talk about how we get society better situated, better prepared to deal with these calamitous events. And one of the things that I work on in my own private work in my firm at Preparedness Labs Incorporated and in my own research through the university where I'm a part-time professor in emergency management, is we talk about the power of human relationships, social capital theory. We know that people who are well-connected to their neighbors fare far better in disasters. We know that strong, well-cohesive linked communities do well, right? The difficulty we have in emergency management is that we don't have a culture of preparedness, which means for whatever reason, and I've did a podcast episode on this last season, and we've talked about it extensively, we've turned into a society that has a culture of dependency. Every time there's a bump in the night, we immediately turn for the government to help us. It's the government's job to rescue us. Why isn't the government here? Where's the government aid? Where's the government relief programs? It's this constant call for an external force that we don't control to come in and ameliorate our situation, right? The difficulty we have is that we have exceptionally high outsized expectations into the actual capability and capacity of what emergency management can deliver. The people that work in it are fantastic. They're dedicated. They're residents of your community. They care about it, but they are exceptionally limited in resources on what they can do. So you have events that happen like North Carolina. You have massive unexpected flooding, towns washed away and everything, right? And everybody expects several hours later this massive machine to come in and start plucking everybody and helicopters to come in from everywhere. And let's just put it this way. That's the Appalachian Mountains. And if you've ever done air operations in a mountainous environment, it is chaotic at the best of times and exceptionally dangerous at the worst of times. You can't just throw every helicopter you have into a contested airspace and not expect accidents to happen, right? There has to be some control, there has to be some order, and there has to be some management. So when FEMA comes in, and part of their air operations through the transportation Department of Transportation is to come in and establish an air operations in the area. They have a responsibility to do that to ensure that access is controlled and is maintained safe. And they do that to NOTAMs. Have you ever heard of a NOTAM? It's a notice to airmen, and it is published by the FAA as to who can go into what space, the type of class reserved airspace it is, how do you get access, where do you have to put flight plans. They're placing order into chaos to ensure helicopters don't run into each other. If you are a helicopter operator dropping supplies off and you were doing that 5 hours after the disaster, and now FEMA comes in and puts order into chaos and puts rules on you, you may look at that and say, hey, these people are interfering with what I'm trying to do. They're stopping me from delivering relief aid. The difficulty is that's obviously not what they're doing. They're trying to put order into chaos and keep things from running into each other, but it's perception. It's because we've lost institutional trust in government. And we can trade this all the way back to, especially in the United States of America, the exceptionally low trust in Congress and the elected officials. You can say what you want, but Hurricane Helene is a political event. You're in the middle of the largest, most important election campaign in the world, and this type of calamitous event happens. And even if it looked for the slightest degree that the current administration was not providing stellar rock star level support, the contender would obviously use that to their leverage. It's politics. There's nothing off the table, nor should it be, but that's just the nature of where we are. Hurricane Helene was a political event. Now, if you're in emergency management, you're trying to execute a task in an area that you do not know, right? And I call this, and we've got a couple of podcast episodes before, and I've wrote some articles and blogs on my website at preparednesslabs.ca, and about this thing I call intelligence preparation of the disaster space, right? So before anybody conducts operations into a disaster space, you have to understand what's going on. So a lot of what initial things that are done, and this is translated from intelligence preparation of the battle space that's done in the military intelligence processes, is that we have to understand everything that's going on in the space. We have to know who's who, who's where, what the needs are, and it's called a needs assessment within emergency management. This all has to be done before you throw the kitchen sink at something. If you just throw everything you have at the problem in a disorganized fashion, you're likely to create more chaos than you were attempting to ameliorate. The thing is we have many actors in the space, And when we have outsized expectations of what FEMA should be doing by the population, that if they fail to meet those outside expectations, the population is going to view them as a failure. And if you're a failure in a political era, then it is one candidate's fault versus the other, right? And then when information is not readily available, conspiracy theory starts to seed. We heard that early on in FEMA's initial responses into the situation, that they were stopping people, that they were seizing assets. Even Elon Musk came out stating that they were not allowing him to deliver Starlink satellites. And it came back to the NOTAM problem, and the Secretary of Transportation in the United States personally tweeted to Elon Musk saying, "This is not what we're doing. This is what we're trying to do. Talk to me directly if you have a problem." Now, I'm not defending the administration. I'm trying to defend what the reality on the ground is in a large scale, unexpected disaster space like we're seeing in Hurricane Helene. First of all, FEMA's trying to get in there to figure out what is going on. This is also a local and a state capacity. Now, there is a slew of communication and coordination problems in the public sector that are real and they're apparent, and they should not be apologized for, and they need to be addressed, right? There is no clear, concise, easy passage of information from local to state to federal agencies. And it's very important that we understand that the federal agencies are not there to take over. The role of a federal agency, at least here in Canada, I'll give you a prime example. When the military is called out to help in a disaster response, they work for the province. The military can never come in and take over a situation. They're legally prevented from that in Canada. When a military unit deploys to a disaster zone, they work for the province. So in the United States, it would be if an American military unit gets deployed to a disaster area, they would work for the state governor, right? They would do the missions the state governor assigned them. They don't come in and take over and start executing missions. Because when you do that, you have a breakdown of command and control on the public sector side, and then pure chaos and mayhem ensues. So there is a breakdown in the area of communications within the public sector. What I want to concentrate on is you. John, Jane, Mohammed, Q public, sitting at home, wondering what the heck is going on in your area and where do you turn for information, and who is telling you the correct information, who is providing misinformation. And remember, misinformation is the intentional spreading of information that you believe to be true, but it is in fact false. Disinformation is the intentional spreading of information you know to be false, but you do it anyhow, right? So there's misinformation, there's disinformation, and there are facts out there. And all of that depends on one key element: trust. Who do you trust to provide you the truth? I've done research for over a decade in trust in government, and trust in emergency management, and trust in preparedness. And where do people turn in times of chaos like this now? So if you can imagine yourself right now and something big and bad happened to where you live, where you are right now, where would you turn? What radio station, what internet channel, what social media platform, what media center, what group of friends? You have a set of trusted resources that you will immediately turn to see what's going on. The reason you do that is because those organizations or people have provided value to you in the past, right? They've provided information to you that has proven to be useful and valuable to you, and therefore improved your situation. So when the next chaotic iteration comes along, you turn to these trusted sources because these are people that you have gotten the right information from in the past, right? Right now, how many people out there listening in the audience today can put your hand up in the air and say your government, your local government emergency management organization falls within that trusted organization? My research tells me they don't. You may be an anomaly, but right now that's probably not. And I would argue the vast majority of people listening to this are unaware of how to contact their local emergency management organization. If I was to say to you, what is the local radio station that your local emergency management organization is going to use to give you important information in the event that cell towers are down? You probably don't know the answer to that question. You're going to turn, by research, this is not me guessing, research tells me you're going to turn to friends and family and close community organizations. Those are your trusted organizations. My challenge to the emergency management community, and what I write on, and what I gave 2 speeches at the conference about, and I'm going to a couple of conferences in the next 6 months around Canada to give presentations on the work that emergency management needs to do to get into your trusted support list. People don't listen to government just because government is speaking, right? We all know it. Just because somebody from the government says something, that doesn't make it true, and that doesn't mean you will believe it. Institutional trust has eroded to the point now where we, the majority, or at least the plurality of us, suspect the information we're being told by the government. We look at it through a lens of, maybe, but what is the motive behind them telling me this, right? So we don't outright trust what the government says. So a government official in a cool uniform, a nice crested polo in front of a podium with a microphone, giving you some what they believe to be critical information, you're not going to believe it just because they occupy a position. You have to trust that position. And the research says you don't include your local emergency management officials in that. You probably don't know who they are. That's partially your fault, partially their fault. It's because they don't get together. And I speak this about a whole of community, right? Because we know through research that every time we have a disaster, there are 4 separate responses. Civil society responds. That's you and your neighbors. You help each other out. Over 80% of people pulled out of earthquake rubble are done so by their friends and neighbors in the immediate area. Urban and heavy and light urban search and rescue teams get the ones that are really hard to get, but they get less than 20% of the people trapped in rubble. So it's your friends and family and the people in the immediate area that are going to drag your butt out of the collapsed building. So that's one response. The other one is not-for-profit organizations. What I talked about in extending, that's your faith group. That's your local Red Cross team. That's your local Salvation Army. That's your local community organization stepping up and assuming a role that they probably didn't have before, but they're using their current organization to get people going, right? So I've always said, and I will go to my grave saying, there is nobody that can whip up food faster than a United Church Women's Club, right? They can get that kitchen and feeding 100 people, right? So they may be normally feeding the parish and feeding Sunday dinner to people after service, but now they're feeding the community, right? So they're doing a role that they did before for a different purpose. So that's your community response. Then we have your corporate response. Everybody works for a business, right? You may own a business. Businesses are residents of our society. When a disaster happens, it happens to the business as well as the residents. So the businesses are up, they're trying to recover themselves. And then if they have an ability to do, they're going to step up and start to assist the businesses around them and the residents around them, right? So if they have generators, if they have portable power, if they have portable water filtration systems, if they have mechanical systems, if they have recovery of vehicles, if they have heavy equipment for moving debris, these are all unorganized but very valuable responses going to happen from the corporate sector. That's 3 of the 4. The 4th one is the government, right? They have a mandated, in the United States, it's under the Stafford Act. In Canada, it's under Public Safety Canada's legislation. There's a lot of legal frameworks everywhere, but they have a legal responsibility, and they've been given the task of responding to a disaster in the local area, right? So these people will go. And remember, police, fire, and EMS falls into incident response. Emergency management is about incident management. So when emergency management gets involved, it's the one step up from those first responders on the ground. It's the people starting to manage the bigger picture. So those 4 responses are all happening simultaneously. What we don't do well in our societies is coordinate and cooperate. We don't talk to each other. And I've said this concept that I announce at the last conference that I presented at was something called a community response council, right? Call it whatever name you want. It's a place where members of the community, all 4 of those groups, get together for the intense purposes of walking through what a disaster response would look like in the area, what you can contribute, what you're going to do, and how would that work with everybody else, right? So, for example, if the public sector needs heavy equipment, but it doesn't know or hasn't met up with or sat down and had a coffee with the owner of 2 local construction firms, that may be 50 to 100 pieces of heavy equipment and 300 trained operators that may be available to be used pretty darn quickly in disaster response and relief efforts. But if that relationship isn't built and coordinated prior to the event, then everybody in the local area doesn't know about everybody else, and they don't know what each other can do. None of this costs any money. Nobody's paying any fees. Everybody's just getting together to have the conversation. We don't do that. When you have the conversation about what I can do and what I can't do, and I tell the truth and don't build up expectations to something I can't meet, we establish trust. So when a disaster happens, the population turns to a trusted source. If I'm in a local emergency management office and I get myself on people's trust radar, if I become something they're familiar with, like the first time you know of a local emergency management office shouldn't be when a hurricane's about a kilometer off the highway, right? Come on. This is what happens, but we don't build relationships with the communities we serve. And sending out pamphlets and having one day where all the fire trucks are out and the lights are on is not building connections with the community, right? It's about getting out and knowing everybody. I have this one good colleague and acquaintance. He runs he's emergency manager for Canadian City of a little over 700,000 people, right? And he says if he spends more than 50% of his time in his office, he is failing. Because he needs to be out in the community, not getting them to come into City Hall. He needs to be out at their meetings. So he goes out and he goes to the church choir meetings, and he goes to the Islamic Association meetings, and he goes to all the different community organizations. One of his best friends is the head of the Chamber of Commerce. He knows all the business improvement areas. He's met all the local business people. He knows their concerns. He's talked to them about how they can help. He's building these relationships that build trust. So when he pops up above the radar to give out information, then you're going to see him and say, hey, that's Jeff. I know that guy. I've talked to him. He's been at our community picnics. He's a trusted source. So then what happens is you listen to your emergency manager and you defeat disinformation and misinformation because you have a trusted source. Because your trusted source has been identified, you know who it is, you believe that they're going to tell you the truth, you trust them to do so that when the information they release, it gets to you over a known channel. You already know how they're going to speak to you and when they're going to speak to you. You hear what they say, and you're far more likely to adopt the behaviors that they recommend than if somebody simply assumes the fact that I'm the North Carolina I'm the director of the North Carolina State Emergency Management Organization. I'm going to put on that cool jacket with the badge. I'm going to stand in front of the microphone with all these cool first responders behind me, and I'm going to say something. Nobody is going to give jack squat what you say simply because you have a position. The world doesn't work like that. You may want it to work that way. You may think, hey, everybody should just listen to me because I'm the dude in charge of emergency management, but that doesn't work. In fact, the research that I've done, and I've done some pretty extensive research in Canada on this, is about 19% of the people believe you. That's the figure I have. It may be different in the United States of America, but for the research I've done, 19% of the people believe a government spokesperson at their word. Full stop. That is it. The other 81% may believe, comma, trust but verify, comma, ask about the motive. There's 30 to 40% of the population that simply will never believe what people say because they're from the government. Again, that's a harder trust wall to overcome. It can be overcome. That barrier can be defeated. But there is a lot of difficulty and barrier within the emergency management community because they believe you and I as residents will simply do what we're told. We'll be lemmings. We're told to turn left at street X because that's the evacuation route. Somehow we're just going to follow that because you said it. That's not what the research tells us. That's not what interviews tell us. And that's not what data shows us. People need trusted sources. You need, if you want the community to listen to you, you need to put yourself in front of them and demonstrate to the community that you should be trusted, that you're a valued resource in a disaster. I mean, look at this point. Right now, in the United States of America, FEMA is trying to prove to people that it's a truth teller. That's where we are. And again, I go back. We could have a 7-hour debate on a panel to argue why we're in this position. Fair enough. You can have all the positions you want on that, but I am a realist. We are at a point now where FEMA has to set up a separate website to try to be a fact checker, to try to get rid of or challenge or fight all of the disinformation and misinformation that's out there on the internet from some pretty prominent sources. Those resources that FEMA is using to do that are therefore not available to do another function that FEMA may have more interest in. This is the world we're in. This is what happens when we don't trust. I am not going to tell you to blindly trust government. I am a libertarian at heart. The world doesn't work like that. What I'm telling you is your responsibility in this entire equation as a resident of community X in state Y in country Z. Your responsibility is to find out trusted sources of information that you will turn to in times of crisis and chaotic events, where you will be able to get accurate information, actionable information, and the information that you will use to make decisions for you and your family. Because ultimately, the decision to evacuate, to stay, to turn left, to turn right, to prepare or not to prepare is 100% up to you, right? My recommendation through this 28-minute and 38-second rant is just that. You need to find trusted sources. I would recommend your local and state or provincial emergency management, but if nothing else, find out your local emergency management office, find out where their website is, find out how they intend to talk to the residents in times of an emergency. And I'll give you one example before we move on to the second half of today's a little bit longer episode and start of season 12. I have a friend who's sitting in the west coast of Florida right now, and she is staring down the barrel of Hurricane Milton, who is poised to smash Tampa for the first time, and I think it's near 100 years since Tampa had a direct hitter in that region. And I said to her, who's your local emergency management? So I went online and I found out that today at 2 p.m. Eastern, the local emergency management office in their county is having a press conference. I said, that's probably a pretty good thing you need to listen to, right? To figure out who these people are. Because right now, 2 days before the crisis is going to hit, we're a little late in the timing to find out trusted sources, but it's better late than never. Find out what radio stations they're going to use to talk to you, because the cell towers are likely going to go down. Make sure that your family's ready. All these things we're going to talk about in a minute or so. And when we talk about how to get ready to be punched upside the head. So sit back, grab yourself your second beverage. Here we go with part 2 and how to prepare for a major hurricane and other nasty personal events. We know, and you'll hear this if you listen to our previous episodes, that the most important question in preparedness is who is responsible for your outcomes? And the only answer to that is you. That does not mean you're on your own. That does not mean you're a lone wolf. That does not mean you have to stockpile 2 years worth of food in your basement. It simply means that if you want better post-event outcomes than you're getting now, it is your responsibility to coordinate that. And it is your responsibility to set you and your family up for success. That's the free information we offer here at Inside My Canoe Ed and our parent company, Preparedness Labs Incorporated. We are a Canadian firm dedicated to providing you the best possible non-apocalyptic and evidence-based information. And when I say evidence-based information, I have been researching individual, household, and community preparedness for over a decade. I've written a couple of books on Amazon. I've got a video course about it. But today is just a quick and dirty, what do you do when you're staring down the barrel of something like Hurricane Milton? Understand the threat. What is the threat you're actually facing? I'm facing a hurricane likely means nothing to a lot of people other than this big swirling thing and a bunch of flooding. There are 3 main threats from a hurricane. One is storm surge. Storm surge is ocean water that the ocean level rises with the high winds and the movement of the waves, and it brings large volumes of water inland. Sometimes storm surge can be up to 27, 30 feet high and come miles inland. So imagine a wall of water, the height of a 2-story building, and about 2 miles deep coming inland. That is storm surge. It takes out absolutely everything in its path. That's what destroys those swath of homes that you see on the beach that are no longer there. You see the pylons, but most of the homes are gone. That is storm surge. How do you defeat storm surge? I'm going to be blunt with you. Get the hell off the beach, right? If you're not 20, 30 miles inland and further if you're on a waterway, then you're too close to the shore. There really is no other answer to storm surge than to get the heck out of there. Don't be there. You know, as Karate Kid used to say all the time, the best defense is not to be there. And the truth with storm surge is exactly that. Get out of the way and get inland and get upland. The same strategy that you would use for a tsunami is to get to higher ground. The same thing with storm surge. That's number 1. Number 2 is flooding. We saw with Hurricane Helene, the massive, incredible amounts of rainfall that fell in a short period of time onto an ecosystem that does not have the natural capacity to carry that water load. That's what triggers mudslides and massive, almost immediate slides. It causes local dams to overwhelm or fail completely, and it causes large volume of water to move through a town where large volumes of water haven't moved before, right? Now in Asheville, North Carolina, they have had 4 major flooding events in the last just slightly over 100 years. So it's not new to Asheville, North Carolina, but it's new to the people that live there. And a lot of the residents may be moving in and out or just didn't consider this could happen to them. The only way to really, as an individual, to address flooding is to, 1, get a proper flood map of your area. Investigate with your local emergency management to see if there is proper flood mapping that has been done in your area. Check for resources, ask questions to see if you can access a flood map. If you can't access a flood map, then you have to put your brainy hat on and go stand outside and look at the topography. Now, topography is hills and valleys, etc. And when you get a heavy rainstorm, and I've shown you one scene before, you've seen a slight little elevated water flowing down the streets. Okay, now add 4 feet to that. Where's that water going to go? Where's it going to hit? Where's it going to traverse into? Where's it going to pass through your yard? Is it going to come down? If your home is at the base of a big hill, your home is probably going to go for a bath, right? That's the type of thing. You just have to put your brain hat on, stare at the topography around you, and look to see where the water may go. Do your best estimates. Talk to your neighbors. This is where preparedness wins, is when you talk to your neighbors, you bring a community together, and you start talking amongst yourselves who live in a common area to say, if we get the type of rainfall that hit Hurricane Helene, that hit Asheville, North Carolina, eastern Tennessee, and parts of Florida, right? If we get that level of rainfall, it's going to cause massive amount of flooding in a very short order. Where's that water going to go? Figure that out. Ask your public works. Ask the question to your emergency management folks in the local area. Understand to the best of your ability where that water is going to go, and don't be there. Water is nature's most powerful force. It will move your house. If you live in a trailer or something like that, it's gone. If you live in a wooden house, it'll just pick up off its foundation. I don't care if it's strapped down, and it'll move it down the river. Unless you're in a rock solid concrete building with foot thick walls, and no entrance for the water, your home is going to move if it's in a floodway, right? So that is obviously not a shelter-in-place option for you. What you're trying to ascertain is whether or not you can shelter in place in your home without losing it to a tidal surge or without losing it to a flood, right? So if your home is in a place that you believe is going to survive a massive deluge of water from the outside, the other thing that a hurricane can do to you is wind, right? So up to now, for my Canadian friends, that if for a hurricane category 4, that the next one and the last one were when it hit landfall, that's up to a 200 kilometer an hour wind or 130 mile an hour wind. Okay. The wind is likely going to take the roof off your house. So obviously the second story of your house is not an appropriate place to be because the roof may go away. Everything that's outside is going to move. So what you're looking for is 2 things. One, you're looking for large trees that if they were to fall over, look at every tree around your house. Doesn't matter how well into the ground you think it is. Does your house have, or is it at threat from a large tree falling down and hitting it? It's not hard. Go outside. If this thing falls over, will it hit my house? Right? You're making an assessment as to whether your house is a safe shelter-in-place location. In the end, out of a group of a bunch of families, it may turn out that 2 of the 8 houses are not safe places for families to shelter in place. So during the event, you're probably better off sheltering in somebody else's home that is better off. The wind is going to knock trees over. It's likely to take roofs off. And the most important thing that people miss with wind is it's not necessarily a 200 kilometer an hour wind. It's the thing the wind is blowing around. This happens all the time in tornadoes, that people are injured or killed by flying debris. Once it gets up to a certain, 40, 50 mile an hour range, even less, you're inside. You're sheltering in place, and you're not going to be in a position to evacuate and move because you're going to expose you and your family to crap that's flying around in the air. Choosing a shelter in place location based upon your threat from all the water, all the wind, and the big trees that could come crash down gives you the best possible strategy of, if I had the shelter in place, if I had to stay where I am, this is my safest, best option for me and my family, and it might just very well be one of your friends and neighbors' homes in the area. That's why preparedness is a community thing. It's not just individualistic, but it's getting together. Understanding that the most advantageous situation is to evacuate. The best thing is to evacuate. And when you think about an evacuation plan for you and your family, there are very few considerations. Number one is you need to have a place to go before you evacuate. Right now, in times of peace and calm where you live, if you were told to evacuate your house, would you know where you're going? The number one advice I give to people and organizations that I work with and to students when I lecture is have a pre-designated place you can go. And I'll give my example I do all the time. I have a friend of mine who lives about 100 miles or about 160 kilometers from here, and we have a reciprocal agreement. His basement's open to me and my family, and my basement is open to him and his family. Anytime. No questions asked. If he has to evacuate on no notice, grab what he can and leaves, and we'll talk about that in a second. But if he has to get out of notice, he's got a free place to go. He's got to get his butt here, right? Which is having a car and having enough gas in it. We'll get to that in a second. But he has an absolutely free place to go where he will be safe. He'll be surrounded by people that care. He'll be calm. He'll have access to power, hot water, because the likelihood of an event hitting him and I at the same time are slim, not nil, but slim. And so that my place becomes a safe place for him and his family to evacuate to. They can crash here. We'll feed them. We'll take care of them. They can have hot showers. They have access to my internet, and they will be able to start reconstructing or coming up with the next steps at that point. You do not want to try to figure out what's going on, and in the unlikely event, try to start rebuilding your life sitting in the Motel 6 in a town 50 miles away, paying $100 at night, trying to feed your family on takeout food, trying to fight to share on public Wi-Fi, sitting in a Motel 6 hotel, sitting in a room with all of your kids and your family all stressed out to the nine while you're trying to figure out how to get a hold of an insurance adjuster. Okay? That's not the place. And worse yet is looking at a public shelter, right? So think of a hockey arena, because I'm a good Canadian. Put 200 people on cots in the middle of a hockey arena using the public washrooms that are there, public Wi-Fi if it's available, and ask yourself, is that an appropriate place to put my family in an evacuation? The answer to that is an absolute no. Find a family, find a friend, find somebody where you can confidently go on no notice, and you will be welcomed with open arms. Doesn't cost you any money. All you have to do is the second part. Be able to get there. However your transportation, bike, moped, e-bike, a long hike, car, whatever you choose to use, but your evacuation method needs to be ready to go and good to go. When you evacuate is key. Right now, if there's people on the west coast of Florida that plan on evacuating and they're still home, they've missed the point, right? You leave and you leave now. It is Monday. The hurricane is expected to hit there Wednesday afternoon. You need to be going now. Don't be waiting till you get a mandatory evacuation order. That's too late. Then you just create a parking lot on the highways and everybody sits there. That's not evacuation success. If you're going to evacuate, you need to be evacuating now. Go to your safe space, well north or well south. I don't think there's much south, but well north, even out into Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, up into the Appalachian Mountains away from the current location. But you know what I mean. Far away up into the panhandle of Florida. Get out of the way. Go to a place. Have a mini family vacation while the thing comes through, and then reconstruct your life at that point. Waiting for a mandatory evacuation means you're creating a parking lot situation. Look at your neighborhood. If everybody had to come running out of their home right now at the very same time, jump in their cars, and all collectively head towards this the exit. Your neighborhood is not designed for rapid exit. I look at transportation studies. I look at logistics. I'm a professional logistician. When you look at transportation and lines of communication management, evacuation is not a consideration when they laid out the streets of your neighborhood. It's not. It is exceptionally slow, and it'll grind to a halt in a heartbeat. And everybody be sitting there panicked as the threat bears down on them and they're trying to stop and go in traffic. That's not success. Don't do that to your family. And the last thing is, what do I take when I evacuate. Well, let's be clear. I can't define for you what is priceless. But most people, if they're asked, they're going to come up with 90% of the stuff in their home. So you really have to figure out what it is that you have to grab. But the key to everything I say is take what you want, but make the list now. When high stress events happen, people don't think clearly, right? People don't make mistakes. You know, you've always heard that saying where people rise to the occasion in a disaster. Well, they don't. When human beings are put under exceptional levels of no-notice stress, people revert to their level of training. They fall to their level of training. This is why high-performance athletes do well in high-stress situations, because they've practiced this high jump 17,000 times, and they're about to do it for Olympic gold, but they've done it 17,000 times. Why do military special operations teams, police SWAT teams, why are they very good at clearing rooms in high stress situations? Not only because they're amazing human beings, but because they've cleared a room 2,500 times this year in the very same methodology. So when the stress level goes through the roof, they fall to their level of training and they execute the task that's put in front of them. When you have an evacuation list for your home, you print it off, you laminate it, whatever, you put it in a prominent place where everybody knows. When the big bad day comes, you are simply doing what the list is telling you to do. You do the hard thinking and decision making in times of peace and calm, so when chaos hits, you have a list of things that you want to grab and go. I'm not going to sit here to make bug out bags and all these other bags. All that half that crap is ridiculous. Think about what you will need when you leave. Think about what was very difficult to replace, like IDs, things like that, and the few priceless items in your home that really are. For me, there's 3 items. That's it. I have my dad's Bible that was got a signature in there from my great-grandmother in 1955. I've got my commissioning scroll from Her Majesty the Queen, which can never be issued again. And I've got a little jar of sand from every place in Afghanistan that I chased around bad guys. That's it. That's it. Everything else can burn to the ground and I can replace it, right? All my mementos, all my photos, whatever, man. I'll be fine. Life will be good. I can't save everything, right? If you think about that, when big bad events like hurricanes that you get several days notice happen, and you can look at the threat. Hey, listen, these are the big things that hurricanes can do for me. Gather all the intelligence you can with you and your friends in your community. Brainstorm, think about the best idea. If we had to shelter in place, this is the safest location for us to be. And if we have to evacuate, here's our strategy. Now, when you shelter in place, there are all kinds of different information on the internet telling you how many days you need to be able to shelter in place for. We here at Inside My Canoe Head will tell you to be prepared to provide for all manner and respects to those for whom you're responsible for 14 days. The reason I choose 14 is not because it's cool. I choose 14 because based upon research that we did in North America, 94% of the critical infrastructure is restored within 14 days after a disaster. Critical infrastructure are those 10 sectors that hold society up: cell, medicine, transportation, food, water, utilities, technology, manufacturing, government, retail. All of these systems that work to keep your urban and suburban area functioning, they're going to go down to some degree in a major significant event. The data tells us that 94% of the time they're back up and running in 14 days. That 6% is an exception where that sector of critical infrastructure was totally destroyed. So, for example, if you had a major tornado like Moore, Oklahoma, and it took out the water treatment plant, that's not coming back online in 14 days, right? But that's a statistical anomaly. So if you and your family are ready to shelter in place in the location you've chosen, and you are able to provide for all their needs for 14 days without getting any external assistance, then you've met what we recommend as a standard, right? Now remember, preparedness is a lifestyle. It's not a stockpile. You don't need things that you probably don't already have, right? You don't need to go out and spend a bunch of money. This isn't one of those campaigns where you see on YouTube all the time. If the first $1,000 on prepping, buy this. My first $20,000 prepping, this is what I spent it on. If you've got $500, these are the things you should buy. No, not at all. You need to sit down and say, I've got a shelter. It's going to keep my family warm. They're going to have clothes on. As the gray-bearded Green Beret, and I love this guy. He's fantastic. Follow on YouTube. Look at his stuff. He's got a great business. The gray-bearded Green Beret. He's got a great way of talking about shelter, right? You need something to sleep under, something to sleep on, and something to sleep in. The first layer of your sheltering is your clothes, right? So if you have a set of clothes, and this is the advice I gave to my friend that's staring down Milton, get a comfortable set of rain appropriate clothing that you're going to wear during the event, and have a dry set of comfy clothes stuffed in a garbage bag, because everything's going to get wet in a hurricane, right? So double bag a nice comfy pair of clothes, top to bottom, left to right, everything you need, and double bag them in garbage bags. The building is going to survive if you've chosen the right building. You're going to have a place to shelter. Water, where are you going to get water? Now, they say 2 liters per day per person. That can be pop, that can be juice, that can be bottled water. Like, listen, it really doesn't matter. Coffee, tea, you just need water, right? You probably have that already in your house. And if not, you've got a bunch of old Tupperware jars you could fill from water from the tap. You don't need to go buy a whole stockpile. Food. You can feed your family for the next 2 weeks out of what's in your house, probably, right? I'm pretty darn certain. The one thing that does cause a question, and this is where you may, depending on your group and your friend group, need to have an ability to cook the food. So if you're a big pasta eater, raw pasta is a bit tough to digest, right? You can soak beans to make them digestible over, 24 hours. But if you need to create heat to cook food, how do you intend to do that when all your current appliances in your house don't work, right? A lot of people answer the barbecue on the back deck. Well, guess what? That barbecue is likely to go for a free ride around the neighborhood and a tour of the city through the air in the middle of the hurricane. Think about that. Somebody in your group, somebody in your family, somebody in your close neighbors probably has a camp stove. Or you're going to leave the gasoline, you're going to leave the propane tank outside, but you're going to slide the barbecue itself inside the living room during the hurricane, so that when the hurricane passes, you can move the barbecue back out on the back deck and you can use that to heat your food, right? I've said to my friend, and I've said all along, there's nothing better than a hot cup of coffee or a hot cup of tea. That's the one test my wife puts to me all the time, is that wherever we go, I have to have the ability to make her a hot cup of tea with cream and sugar. That's her standard. I'm doing my job. If on demand, anywhere, even driving down the road in the car, I can pull off the side of the road and make her a hot cup of tea. That's her standard, right? Feed the family. It's not hard. You've got the food. You don't need to go out and buy a whole bunch of stuff. You don't need to buy the meal buckets. You don't have to buy MREs and all this other stuff. Like, you don't have to spend money. You have the food. Your consideration is, what are you going to do with it? Make sure you have garbage bags to get rid of it. And that you've got access to your trusted sources of information. You need to have a first aid kit. And trust me, you have one in your house now. If you were to go around your house and collect all of your Band-Aids, bandages, ointments, first aid type stuff, pills, stuff, and you brought them all together in one location, I think you'd be pretty damn surprised as how much stuff you already have in your house when you do that and you bring the first aid together. If you want a refresher, there's all kinds of YouTube information on first aid. I'm not going to recommend any specifically because I don't want you to sue me when you watch it, follow it, and it doesn't work. But the Red Cross and St. John Ambulance have great free information about first aid guides. You can always get a book from the library free of charge to learn how to do it. This stuff doesn't cost you money. It just costs you a bit of time and effort, right? So think about the question that I ask people to do, because I've got detailed stuff on my website, and I've got detailed stuff about how to go through this long checklist to ensure you and your family's ready to shelter in place. Ask yourself the question, what does your world look like when you lose access to something you depend upon, right? So what does your world look like when the water supply to your home shuts off? How do you intend to live in that home when the water supply doesn't shuts off? And oh, by the way, that's the water to refill the toilet too. What does your world look like? How are you going to navigate that? What does your world look like when the power's out? When the gas supply turns off? That's what I mean about those simple questions. What does your world look like when the cell tower goes down? For some people, that's going to be a good day because the damn thing will shut up, right? What does it happen when you can't get the internet? What happens when the phone line doesn't work, right? These are simple questions. And then how do you intend to navigate and deal with it? Those are the type of questions that you ask yourself. The end result is, in the end, with you and a small group of people in your community at large, get together and talk through this issue, sheltering in place, evacuation, building all of these ideas, you create a culture of preparedness in your community. And you've done so without spending a penny. Preparedness is free. I fight people all the time who are always trying to sell stuff. Now, there are some great corporations who have some kits that are put together. I had one lady on my podcast from California. She's got a fantastic system for people who are looking for pre-established, like put together kits that have everything that they think they want in it, all ready to go by notable and appropriate people. It's all there. Like, those do exist. What I suggesting is, go through the questions. Ask yourself, what do you need to be able to do? And do you have everything you need to be able to do that? I'm going to suggest that if you took some time poking around your residence, you probably already have everything you need. You've just never looked at it through that lens. And then if you look, hey, listen, I want to be able to do X for 14 days in my shelter in place location, but I'm missing this piece and I don't have it, and my neighbors don't have it. Well, then maybe you might buy something, but you'll be buying something that you figured out you needed in a plan you developed for your family. Adopting a culture of preparedness means you accept responsibility for your outcomes. You look at, how do I shelter in place? How do I evacuate? What does this world look like for me? And is this a safe place for me and my family? And you do that in your family, and you do it with your neighbors and in your small community to build that trust. You know who you trust. You know where you're going to get trust information. And when we as a community start to do that, we look at less and less examples like what's happening in Asheville, North Carolina now, right? You have the world coming to help from across America, and there is very little coordination. There's very little pre-work that was done. So everybody's showing up with the best of interest, thinking their plan is the best one. They're running up against FEMA that's trying to put organization into chaos, and at times that is being interpreted as stopping the flow of aid, and FEMA is the problem. And this is the situation we have. Once that level of trust is lost in that area because people perceive that what FEMA is doing is harming the relief effort, we're in a position where it's exceptionally difficult, if not impossible, to recover that institutional trust in the future. So hopefully today's episode was helpful for you. Welcome to season 12 of Inside My Canoe Head. We have got some great guests planned for this year. We've got mostly discussions like this, long-form discussions about issues of the day and important things related to preparedness. But remember, we're here to serve you. This is 100% free of charge. It always will be. Drop us a line over at www.insidemycanoehead.ca for our Canadian. Tell us what you think. Tell us what you want to hear. Drop a line. And if you do nothing else, please share this podcast with a friend or family member. The more people that we can get thinking about preparedness, the better the world will be. Take care, stay safe, and we'll see you later this week. Fuck you.